Hello, I'm Dr. Parminder Kaur, Assistant Professor, Humanities Department, Bhopal School of Social Sciences. Today, I'll try to explain the concept of cost and revenue. Why do we need to understand the concept of cost and revenue? It is essential to understand producer's equilibrium. That is, what is the main motive of producer? And the main motive of producer is profit maximization. And how does the producer maximize his profit? That is, at a point where the difference between total revenue and total cost is maximized. So it's very important to understand what is the meaning of the term cost and revenue. I'll try to explain this concept with the help of an example. Imagine you're starting a restaurant. So what are the costs that you'll have to incur? The costs involved will be, first, you need to have a place. It could be your own place, or you'll have to rent out that place. So the rent required. You might not have the funds required to set up a restaurant. So you'll borrow from the bank. So the loan required. You might take an insurance policy. The premium that has to be paid for the insurance policy. You'd require furniture, cutlery, ovens. Of course, you need to hire some permanent employees in the form of chefs, managerial staff, electricity connection, Wi-Fi connection, air conditioners. Now, in addition to all this, once your restaurant becomes operational, there are other costs that have to be incurred so that you're able to serve food on the table of the restaurant. What are the costs of raw materials incurred? For example, you have to spend some money on poultry, on vegetables, fruits, beverages. Now, electricity connection that you take, there is an initial amount that you have to pay for the electricity connection, and the bill that comes for every month is on the amount of consumption of that electricity. So the other bill, and of course the waiters who are going to serve food on this restaurant. Now, if you look at the costs can easily be classified into fixed cost and variable cost. What is the meaning of the term fixed cost? Fixed costs are those costs that are incurred on fixed factors of production that do not change with the level of output. For instance, irrespective of the number of people who actually visit the restaurant owner, or in this case you, have to incur the cost on all these variables shown under fixed cost. And variable cost refers to the cost on labor and raw material that needs to be incurred once the restaurant becomes operational. So what is cost? Cost includes the expenditure incurred by a producer on production of goods and services. I'll try to explain the different types of costs that are incurred in the process of production of a good or service. First, the explicit cost. Explicit costs are those costs which are also known as accounting costs, which can be measured, and they're spent or incurred on hire or purchase of factors of production. For instance, in our case, when you go hire a place, or you hire people, or you buy products, there's a money expenditure that's occurring there. That is the money cost. That is explicit. That can be measured. That can be accounted. Next comes the implicit cost. For instance, you are the producer, but you do not need to rent out a space because you own one. You have the money required to set up a restaurant. You don't need to go to the bank to borrow money for your restaurant. So in that case, that will be known as implicit cost. So what is implicit cost? Is the imputed value of those factors of production that are owned by the producer. Then comes the opportunity cost. What is opportunity cost? Is the cost of the next best alternative foregone. For instance, in this case, if you're setting up a restaurant, what is the next best alternative that you're foregoing? For example, you could have used this money to set up some other business. So that other business is the opportunity cost of setting up this restaurant. Now, there's also a social cost. What is the meaning of the term social cost? Social cost is the cost that the society has to bear on the account of production that takes place. For example, in this case, when you set up a restaurant, you do not do your waste management properly, as a result of which you're dumping your waste in a nearby open space. The society has to bear the environmental cost of this waste that you're dumping. So that is known as social cost. Real cost. Real costs are those costs which cannot be imputed, they're not explicit, they're not implicit, but at the same time the kind of sacrifice and efforts that are made on the part of the producer to set up a business or to start production process, that are known as real costs. So here I would like to tell you all that this difference of cost between fixed costs and variable costs exists only in short run. All the costs become variable in long run. So in short run, what are the different kinds of cost? First is total cost. Total costs are of two types, total fixed cost and total variable cost. Average cost is also of two types, average fixed cost and average variable cost. And then we have marginal cost. Marginal cost means what is the additional cost of production of one additional unit of output. I'll try to explain this with the help of a table. Now, let's look at the first column. The first column depicts output. Output starts from 0 level to 6. So, at 0 level of output, the cost that is incurred is known as fixed cost. You can see in this column, when the output is 0, the total fixed cost is 120. So 120 becomes the TFC. Total variable cost, that is the cost incurred on variable inputs, is 0 at 0 level of output. So what will be total cost? Total cost will be a sum of total fixed cost 100 plus 0 total variable cost, that is equals to 120. Similarly, we'll be able to find out the values of total fixed cost. Now, if you look at the second column, 120 is common for all the values of output, whereas total variable cost goes on increasing. Now, it's very important to understand what is the rate at which this total variable cost will increase. Now, this is determined by the law of variable proportion. The law of variable proportion states that in short run, keeping all the factors constant, when you vary the amount of variable input, the output will initially increase at a increasing rate, then at a decreasing rate, and finally it will start falling. So because the output is increasing at an increasing rate, the cost will increase at a decreasing rate. So if you have a closer look at the variables of the total variable cost column, the cost is initially increasing at a decreasing rate and then increasing at an increasing rate. What will be total cost? Total cost will be a summation of column 2 and column 3, and these are the values that will come for the total cost. Now, if you try to depict these values in the form of a curve, these are the total cost curves that you will get. First, the total fixed cost. The total fixed cost is a horizontal cost curve and it is parallel to the OX axis, but it starts from OY axis. Why is it so? Because total fixed cost is incurred even at 0 level of output, remains constant at all levels of output. So it is a parallel TFC, parallel to the OX axis. Then there is the TVC curve. TVC curve is an inverted S-shaped curve. This is because of operation of law of variable proportion. It increases initially at a decreasing rate and then increases at an increasing rate. The total cost curve, that is a summation of TVC and TFC, is also an inverted S-shaped curve parallel to TVC, and it takes the shape of the TVC because any kind of variation in TC is because of TVC. Another important point that you should take note of is that this curve does not start from 0. TVC starts from 0, that means the variable cost incurred at 0 level of output is 0. But TFC starts from the y-axis because TC is a summation of TFC and TVC, so it starts from y-axis. So this is the shape of the total cost curves. Now we come to the next concept, that is average cost. How do you actually calculate average? So average fixed cost would be, in the first row you can see we left the columns undefined because the output level is 0, so we cannot compute the values of these. When the output level of 1 unit is produced, the average fixed cost is 120. How did we arrive at that figure? That is total fixed cost 120 divided by 1, that is average fixed cost. How will you get average variable cost? That would be total variable cost, in our case 40 divided by 1, that is 40. So 120 plus 40 would become 160. This is the average total cost. Similarly, the values of the rest of the table can be calculated. Now, if you try to plot these values on the curve or a graph, you will get this kind of average cost curves. So average fixed cost. Average fixed cost is a rectangular hyperbola. It declines continuously, but it never meets the OX axis. Why does it happen? Because AFC is equals to TFC upon Q. And TFC is constant, that is, the numerator is constant and the denominator is going on increasing, as a result of which the value of AFC goes on diminishing but never becomes zero. ABC and AC are both U-shaped curve, again because of law of variable proportion, but the difference between the AVC curve and the ATC curve goes on diminishing. Why? Because ATC is a summation of AFC and AVC, and because AFC is falling continuously, so the distance between ATC and AVC goes on diminishing. Marginal cost curve cuts both these cost curves at its minimum point. I'll take it up later. So how do you calculate marginal cost? Marginal cost is the cost of production of additional unit. How can it be calculated in this table? First unit, you cannot. Now if you look at the total cost, refer to the fourth column, that is the total cost column. If you look at it, the cost of production of one additional unit is 180 and the cost of production of 0 unit was 120. So what would be the marginal cost? Marginal cost would be 40, that is 160 minus 20, that is 40. Similarly, what is the cost of production of the second unit? That would be 196 minus 180, that would be 36. Similarly, the values of the rest of the column can be calculated. So this is the table for marginal cost curve. Now if you try to plot this curve, all the cost curves are U-shaped curves because of the operation of law of variable proportion. Here if you look at it, the relationship between marginal cost and average cost. When the marginal cost is falling, average cost is also falling, but the fall in marginal cost is higher than the average cost. That is why the average cost curve is above the marginal cost curve. The marginal cost curve continues to rise, average cost continues to fall, and the MC curve cuts the AC curve at its minimum points and then starts rising. So when MC is rising, AC is also rising, but the rise in MC is higher than the rise in AC. Now, I would like to explain the concept of revenue. Revenue is also important to understand because it is important to understand the producer's equilibrium with the help of cost and revenue curves. What are different types of revenue? Before I discuss different types of revenue, it is important for you all to understand different kinds of markets. We'll try to broadly classify them into two categories: perfect competition and imperfect competition. In perfect competition, there are a large number of buyers and sellers. The product is homogeneous. There is perfect mobility of factors of production, and the firm is a price taker. It has to accept the price that is set by the forces of demand and supply. While in case of imperfect competition, and in this category, monopoly, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, duopoly, monopsony, all these market forms will come under this category. So in case of imperfect competition, the firm has to reduce its price if it wants to sell more. So keeping that in mind, now we'll focus on different types of revenue. First, total revenue. Total revenue is the total receipt that a seller gets by selling a certain amount of commodity. So price into quantity is equals to total revenue. Next, we have the concept of average revenue, that is the revenue earned per unit of output. How do you calculate that? That is total revenue divided by quantity. Then third concept is the concept of marginal revenue. Marginal revenue is the additional revenue generated by the sale of one additional unit. How do you calculate that? Total revenue of n minus total revenue of n minus 1. For instance, you've sold 5 units and you've earned 20 rupees. When you sell the 6th unit, you get 25 rupees. So what will be the marginal revenue of the 6th unit? That will be 25 minus 20, that is equivalent to 20. We'll try to calculate this in the case of, with the help of this table. Have a look at the table. The price is constant. Why is it so? Because we're talking about perfect competition where price is constant and the producer can sell any amount of output at the prevailing price. So output increases 1, 2, 3, 4. The third column, that is a column of total revenue. Total revenue can be calculated by multiplying price into quantity, that is first column into second column. The value that we get is 15. How do you calculate the rest of the values? Similarly, by multiplying all the values, individual values of P and Q. What is average revenue? Total revenue upon quantity. Here the total revenue is 15. 15 divided by 1 would be 15. Similarly, the rest of the values can be calculated. 30 divided by 2, 45 divided by 3. You can observe that all values are coming to equal to be 15. Marginal revenue can be calculated by the formula TRN minus TRN minus 1. So in this case, how will you calculate? Look at the third column. So you take the value 30 minus 15, that is 15. Similarly, you go on deducting and you get the values again 15. So looking at the table here, you realize that in case of perfect competition, price is equals to average revenue is equals to marginal revenue. Now, if you plot these graphs, the kind of curves that you will get for this, price is equals to AR is equals to MR is a horizontal line parallel to the x-axis starting from y-axis. What is the total revenue curve? Total revenue curve is a curve that starts from 0 and increases at a constant rate because the price is same as it has been calculated in the table below. In imperfect competition, the seller has to reduce the price so as to sell more. Have a look at the first column. The producer is reducing the price per unit from 20 to 18, 16, 14 and so on for increase in the level of output. What will be total revenue? That is 20 into 1, 20. Similarly, other values can be calculated. Average revenue, TR by Q, that is 20, and other values can be calculated. Now, if you look at the variation in the values, we see the total revenue initially increases up to the fifth unit, becomes maximum, that is 60 and 60, and then it starts declining and becomes 56. And what about average revenue? Average revenue is declining continuously. How will we calculate marginal revenue? Marginal revenue is TRN minus TRN minus 1. So the first, it is 20. For calculation of marginal revenue, you will have to refer to the third column. So 36 minus 20 is 20. 48 minus 36 is 16. Similarly, other values can be calculated. Now let's plot these values. What are the shape of the curves, the revenue curves do we get in imperfect competition? Now let us have a look at the average revenue and marginal revenue curve. Both the curves are downward sloping curve, but the fall in MR is twice the fall in AR, that is equal to the demand graph. And if you look at the TR curve, wherever MR is 0, that is the point where TR is maximum, and beyond that TR starts declining. So students, here today we've covered the different types of cost, different types of revenue curves under different kind of market structures. In my next lecture, I'll try to cover how is equilibrium determined in perfect competition and imperfect competition. Thank you.